What's going on, everyone? My name is Airik, and I am representing the Tiny Altar. I'm an unfamiliar face to some of you who are used to these tiny talks being hosted by Chris House, but today is his birthday. The day we're recording is his birthday.
Big 4-0.
40. So we wanted to give him some time to. He's probably just rolling out of bed now at 6:15 because you hit that age.
The knees.
You get a little stiff. So happy birthday to Chris House.
Happy birthday,
man.
homeboy.
But I'm pleased to sit here today with a good friend of the program. If you've watched our first Tiny Talk, we had Sean Slaughter, who I believe to be a real estate history expert. He may not say that,
No
but
pressure.
he knows more than the rest of us. So, Sean, welcome.
Thank you, man. It's good to be here. E.
Hey, appreciate you being here. So,
sir.
if you want to give us a little background on who you are and what you do, and
Name is Sean Slaughter, Hampton Roads realtor. I'm also an educator as well. I've been in the music industry probably for about 15 years prior to this. Traveled the world doing that, releasing albums and different things like that, and basically in youth ministry. After that, I became an educator and really specialized working with students that have behavior issues.
sure, okay,
Because I had behavior issues.
sure, okay.
And now I'm into real estate and really love it, really enjoy it. I enjoy the financial freedom it provides, but I also enjoy the ability to just help people get into their home. There's nothing like helping a person buy their first home. There's no feeling like that, man. So I really enjoy that, and helping people with their finances, walk and navigate those kind of issues. So that's pretty much what I do. Have two daughters, Lyric and Jazz, and married to Kim Treese, my beautiful wife. So yeah, man.
Well, shout out to the family.
Yeah,
and
man.
I hope you're still in real estate in 2025 because that'll be when I buy my first house.
Word.
Give or take 5 to 8 years. We'll see. So we're going to talk about something that I believe to be a bit of a umbrella issue to some of the larger issues that we've been having, historically in this country. We're going to talk about fair housing, housing in general. And I talk about it being an umbrella because so many things so many problems stem from unfair housing policies, and they've existed since pretty much the end of the Civil War. So what, 1865? So why don't you give us a little history on Fair Housing Act and the things that kind of sort of led up to that, if you can.
Okay.
And I'll help steer the conversation too. But you're the star, so we're gonna let you.
That's a super loaded
off.
question. I'll give you a really quick Reader's Digest synopsis. So
Okay.
after the Civil War, there was Reconstruction, and Reconstruction really was Black people's moment, and honestly, it was America's moment, because up until this point, Black people were property.
Right.
And they were thought of as property. They were thought of as less than. They were not thought of as citizens. Now they were thought of as citizens. They were thought of as people as far as the law went. Reconstruction happened, and this was the time where America could make a choice.
Right.
We could either find another way through laws, rules, regulations, culture, to diminish and continue to make Black people feel inferior, even though they're free.
Right.
Or we could open our arms and ingratiate Black people or people of color into our society as citizens, as equals.
Right.
Unfortunately, we already know how that went, right?
Right.
And so what began happening was society, and I can't say all of society, but there were particular groups, those who were part of the Confederacy,
Sure.
begin formulating this idea of freedom. Because really what happens is when you think about it like this, and I'm not going to run too far ahead, but when the Jews were enslaved in camps by Hitler, and by the Nazis. Once the Nazis and Hitler were defeated, the Jews were paid reparations.
Right.
They were repaired. They were restored.
Right.
Financially into Jewish banks.
Right.
Those monies were used to rebuild what was destroyed.
Right.
And so there was an opportunity for those that were hurt to be repaired and flourish. And this was the opportunity that America had, and this idea that the Confederacy had was we want to be free from that.
Right.
You know, a lot of times we were just talking about God, guns, and freedom.
Right.
And a lot of times, really, that comes from white evangelical Christians. And my question is, what do you want freedom from?
Right.
And typically, what they're speaking against are maybe welfare programs or entitlement programs or programs, the Rooney Rule, or
right.
And they say we want freedom from that. And really, what they're saying is that we want freedom from accountability and responsibility. Simply because these rules exist, some of these things exist because there was harm. And so, nevertheless, people like the Confederacy, the Lost Daughters of the Confederate was a major group that began this freedom cause, erecting monuments. Most people don't even know. Civil War ended in 1865. I think the first monument wasn't built until 1920. So it wasn't like these are parts of history.
Right.
These were things.
It was a retelling.
It was a retelling. It was intentional. And so this is where Jim Crow comes in, and obviously anything that's happening in the country at the time is going to be affected by this cultural oppression of Black people. And one of those things was housing.
Right.
And once housing began to move from tenements into suburbs, there was an intentional racial engineering of Americans.
Right.
And so let
me just ask you a quick question on that.
Yeah.
So when you talk about this intentional engineering, there are, and I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're good.
I know that, there was government policy
100%
behind this. It's not just that people got together on their own. You and I could be next door neighbors, and we talk to our third next door neighbor, and we agree that the three of us will never sell our house to anybody who doesn't look like us.
No doubt.
There was intentional. There were intentional. Let's call them blockages from the top down.
No doubt.
Right.
No doubt. This wasn't just at the citizen level.
Right.
This was at the governmental level.
Right.
People that are listening to this program, you have to make two decisions concerning the ghetto. You have to make two decisions concerning the ghetto. And really concerning the suburbs. All right? Let's just be honest. I live in Smithfield.
Okay.
In an area called Carrollton. And the houses are, up there. And if I said that to anybody, if I said to you, I live in a community of $300,000 houses and up, you would be hard pressed to meet a person. If you talk to a white person, they'll be like, oh. You know what I'm saying? Like, how'd you know about that area, right? If you talk to a Black person, they'll be like, oh, you live with the white folks, huh?
Yeah.
Why does that automatically come to our mind, right? Why does, if I live in an area or the house price of this in this part of town, why does automatically what comes to your mind? And I moved there a few years ago, and it's a great thought experiment because I tell people and just watch their reaction.
Yeah.
But automatically their mind goes, the white folks be like, huh?
Yeah.
Oh, I got an aunt, uncle.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I ain't know nothing about it. You know what I mean?
Right.
Black folks be like, oh, you there with the white folks, huh?
Yeah.
Conversely, if I said I lived on 21st
in Newport News,
I live on 21st and Chestnut. Because I used to live on 73rd and Roanoke. I live on 21st and Chestnut, right? Wife would be like, right? Because you just know there's a lot of black folks there.
Right.
Black folks be like, word, yo, my aunt live right over there on 18th and Roanoke. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
So if you're listening to this program, you have to make two decisions to come to two conclusions. Either let's talk about the ghetto. Let's talk about the ghetto. Let's not even talk about the suburbs. Either black people have chosen and made a conscious choice to live in poverty, slums, high crime, violence, poor schools, liquor stores, what do you call it? The rezoning of toxic. Yeah, I mean Huntington Ingalls is right there on Chestnut and 42nd. And of course we got the shipyard. Just go straight down Jefferson, or go straight down Warwick, I should say. Either black people love living in these areas. They're just excited and enthralled to live in these areas. And that's why they're there. Well, actually, you have three decisions to make. Either they love living in these areas. That's the first thing, and especially for Christians. Here's the second thing. Either or maybe black people are just not smart enough. Maybe Darwin was right. Maybe that they are apes that have not fully formed. Which, if you're a Christian, you think like that. I don't know how you put those two together.
You can't really reconcile those.
You can't reconcile Darwin and Jesus. They're just not fully formed, and they're not smart enough to get out of those areas. Or you say to yourself, how come people of color comprise 15% of America, but the majority of the hoods are them? And how come in our nicest areas, in our Yorktowns and our Carrolltons and our Smithfields, how come in our nicest areas it's majority Caucasian? And you have to make that decision. And history gives you the answer. Unfortunately, many of us have blamed the people and really thought less of the people. When I have a conversation with somebody about this, typically a white person who does not believe in social justice, and I talk about social justice, and the first thing they say is black on black crime. And they talk about violence. And they totally skip the whole idea of this social engineering, this racial engineering, where white folks, when we'll talk about this, we're allowed to be in nicer areas. And black folks can only live in certain areas. And not just poor black folks. I'm talking about middle class and wealthy black folks were forced to live in undesirable areas because they were not allowed in white areas. You have to make a decision about how you feel about people, particularly people of color, and why there's so many people in the ghetto. And based on how you feel about that human being, I think we'll see a lot about yourself.
That's a good point. And you touched on something that I've been thinking about, in that when you just brought it up, and how you've got these nice neighborhoods here in Hampton Roads, here on the peninsula in particular, Yorktown, for instance. So I am a Theo Huxtable child. Dad has an MBA. My mom's a lawyer. They paid for me to go to college. I had that lifestyle. I grew up in Farmington, if you know where that is, out here in Hampton.
Todd's Lane.
Exactly. The house, it's an affluent black neighborhood. You take the median home price of where I grew up, and you drop that in the middle of Yorktown. There's schooling. Like what do you get for that? Your bang for the buck. Right?
I'm with you.
So I loved my high school. I had a ball. I went to Bethel High School. I had a ball. But at the same time, you would think that in a neighborhood like I grew up, I would have a high school experience more along the lines of what you would get at Tab or York County or Seaford. I don't know all the schools out there in York because we didn't go out there.
Right.
but I didn't.
Yeah.
And so that just kind of even speaks to just even a bit of just the, I was reading a little bit preparing for this because, I know you were going to talk me, out of this house today. Was that, as you mentioned, man, like even middle class and well-to-do black folks are still in an area. I mean, my high school was 65% black.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, and so I say all that to say, what are your thoughts on? Let's actually touch on what you were just talking about. How do we get to that?
Okay, so let's dive into that. So it's the 1930s, and many Americans were living in tenements, right, in buildings, and in order to buy a house, you would have a 10-year note, and that would just be interest only, and then after those 10 years, you have to pay the full note. So back in those days, if you really think about it, and it's hard to understand it today. Actually, this is a whole nother issue, but Wi-Fi is actually one of those issues. Ask any teacher that's teaching on Zoom, the inequities when it comes to, like, you don't even think about it.
No.
Like, you think Wi-Fi is just ubiquitous.
Right.
It really isn't.
Okay.
It's a whole nother issue. But just like when the Model T Ford came out and it was exclusive to certain people, homes were the same way.
Right.
Everybody didn't have a black and white TV. Everybody didn't have a car, and everybody didn't have a home because most people couldn't afford 10 years of interest payments and then that what they call a balloon payment, pay the whole thing off. So the Federal Housing Administration came up with this idea where basically they would insure the loan. So most of the time when you purchase a home, that home becomes the collateral if you default.
Right.
Insurance is important because if you cannot pay that off, really what the banks want is the banks want somebody to be like this. Hey, look, we'll insure that, meaning this. We'll pay you for the default, and we'll go after them.
Right.
Or we'll take care of the home.
Right.
This is what the FHA does. This is what the VA does. Most people don't realize the FHA is not a bank and the VA is not a bank.
Right.
You can go to Langley and get an FHA or VA loan. You can go to any bank.
Right.
It's just insured. If you don't get a FHA or VA loan and you get a conventional loan, then you have to pay what's called PMI, private mortgage insurance.
Right.
So either way, you have to pay insurance.
Right.
So if you think about, and my wife's a veteran, was on the USS Enterprise when 9/11 happened. Her ship was the first ship that actually bombed Afghanistan. When you get a VA loan or you get an FHA loan, you're getting a subsidy.
Right. They don't like that word.
Let's just pause. Let's pause for the cause.
People don't like that word.
You're getting a subsidy. Why? Because those that get a conventional loan have to pay insurance out of their own pockets. If you get an FHA or VA loan, that is paid for you. The VA loan does charge you, they do charge you a fee, but even that can be wrapped up into the loan. So you're not paying anything out of pocket. And if you're, the VA, for many veterans, allow a 0% down payment. All right. FHA, a 3.5% down payment. Conventional, which just means you go in on your own, whatever, you're going to pay between a 10 and 20% down payment. So that means for a $300,000 home, 10% of that, you better come up with $30,000.
Yeah.
And that doesn't include closing costs and all that type of stuff, which generally is about 3% of the loan.
Right.
So you can easily, for a $300,000 loan, be coming to the table, do the math, $39,000, whatever it is. All right. Yeah. So the VA said, okay, we'll take care of it. And they came up with this 30-year amortized loan.
Right.
All right. Where insurance and principal were mapped out over 30 years. Awesome. Great. But before we were talking about people moving into the homes, we got to talk about how the homes were built.
Right.
The VA worked with builders to basically say, gave them a subsidy as well. Levittown, if you read in the Color Law, Levittown is one of these in Pennsylvania, where the Levitt family built this subdivision.
Right.
17,000 homes.
Yeah, there are tons of Levittowns.
No doubt.
Named Levittown.
No doubt.
And they made all the money.
No doubt.
Yeah.
17,000 homes.
Yeah.
In the paperwork from the bank to, and really via the government, to the Levitt family, they would allow them to do construction, and they would help fund the project as long as they were not going to build homes for black people.
Right.
And not only that,
You couldn't sell them.
it was placed in the deed
Yeah.
that these homes can be resold. What's interesting today is that stuff is still in the deed.
Right.
You can go to some of these homes and actually look at the deed, and you know, the color law says don't try to get it taken off the deed. You know, just do an addendum or say something that says this doesn't apply, but keep it there as history because it's that deep. Those homes initially sold for $8,000.
Right.
All right. So I don't want to get into that. So anyway, these homes are built. Now, white Americans are now moving into the suburbs.
This is post World War II.
Post World War II.
Yeah.
All right.
Right.
FHA loans. Now the VA loan is here.
Right.
Post World War II. Even veterans. Here's what's so interesting as well. You know, a lot of people didn't like the Kaepernick kneeling. I wish they liked the Kaepernick kneeling now because everything else that went down. But that's a whole nother conversation. How we only change when violence happens.
Right.
I got so much to talk about. But anyway,
Let it out.
anyway, I just hate when I hear I'm not for looting. All right, I don't like stores and stuff getting towed up.
Right.
At all. I just hate when pastors condemn looting when they have an opportunity to respond to the kneel of Cap. And it wasn't until there was violence. It wasn't until Martin Luther King, Selma, when it was televised and you saw these church ladies in dresses and shoes getting clubbed over the head by cops.
Yeah.
It wasn't until then till white Americans said, "Oh my God, what's the problem again?"
They didn't like the peaceful protests.
Didn't like the peaceful
Right.
protests. You know what I'm saying? But I digress. so anyway, black people were not allowed to move to the suburbs. Okay. Here's one thing you need to know about just housing and space. Space is important when it comes to a neighborhood being run down.
Yeah.
So I grew up in New York. I'm in New York. I grew up in Queens. We grew up in Brooklyn. I grew up in the projects. And where I grew up was run down because there was 1,000 people there.
Right.
All right. The suburbs provided space.
Right.
There was a certain acreage, a certain plot that provided a certain amount of space for people. And the streets, the land, the trees were not being overused. The pollution, the smog were not being overused. So they were allowed to go into these spaces, nature. And my wife, who's a therapist, she can tell you about the healing effects of beauty, of having a lake, a stream, clean air, and anxiety and depression. She can talk about that thing, right? So they're allowed to move into these areas. Black people are not. As a matter of fact, black people are relegated to not only the worst parts of town.
Right.
They're also not allowed home ownership. They're allowed only to pay rent.
Right.
If they are allowed home ownership, their home ownership generally has very, very, very strict regulations that a missed payment would balloon their rent.
Right.
Where they can either pay that or be forced out. Let's just say they stayed. Well, now this ballooned rent, I have to bring in my uncle and my auntie and my grandma and my grandpa to help me pay this rent. So now the suburbs, a neighborhood that can hold 200 holds 100. But in these areas where black people are, the neighborhood that holds 100 now holds 300.
Right.
Additionally, there was a rezoning that, think about this. Think about it like this. I'll just mention these areas. You'll be hard pressed to find certain liquor stores, certain illicit stores or stores that just make the neighborhood look bad. You'll be hard pressed to find those in those areas that are a little bit higher up, the suburbs. But these stores were allowed to be in these lower, really black areas. All right. So overcrowding, um, high rent,
Yep.
no home ownership, high poverty, and I don't care who you are. With extreme poverty comes crime.
Yeah.
Extreme poverty comes crime. When people are hungry, they're gonna take what's yours. You know what I'm saying? Like MOP said, ante up. All right, yap that fool. All right, because we're hot. So you have this intense. It's a science. We call the projects. It's a science project.
Right.
What happens when you put this many people in this much area with limited resources, with high smog, high pollution, industrial oil? There's a place in Queens called Astoria, right? And I bought my first my first 8-ball leather jacket from there. And I bought me an AV from there. You know what I'm saying? A buttercream AV from there.
You're so 90s, man.
So I'm super 90s. If you actually go in those areas, it is surrounded by industrial.
Yeah.
I mean, literally surrounded. Homes and tenements are surrounded by just smog and industry and waste and pollution and so on and so forth. Fast forward, finally 1968 comes.
Right. And we know what happens then.
Federal Housing Administration says, now mind you, just to back up one little thing. Again, this is history.
Yeah.
This is not history that's been reported, but this is history. You can actually go on the internet and Google up the FHA pamphlets and manuals from the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And in those pamphlets and manuals, it shows how you would not be able to build or sell your home
to black people.
Yeah. Those pamphlets were given to real estate agents. Yep. So real estate agents were not allowed to show black people these areas. Now comes 68. FHA says, you know what? The last 40 years, we messed up, y'all. My bad, son.
Sort of, kind of.
That's on me, yo.
Right.
You cannot discriminate no more. You can't color, race, blah, blah, religion, da, 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 da. You can't discriminate anymore. They passed that law, but that still didn't stop discrimination.
Right.
It would still take almost another 20 years because when blacks where the government and the state could not discriminate, the culture would. So when a black person moved into that area, there was a cross on their lawn, or they were harassed, or their house was burned by those living in that neighborhood. So when you look at today's suburbs and you look at today's ghettos, these things were actually created. This is not something that everybody would choose to live in a peaceful area.
Yeah.
Everybody would choose to live in an area that has no crime and no violence and so on. So I haven't met, as a real estate agent, I haven't met one person, black, white, Asian, Latino, Indian, no matter what. I haven't met one person that said, you know what, Sean, you know what I'm looking for? I'm looking for a rundown house where I can hear gunshots every night. That's my dream home.
Right.
And, I want to be scared that my home's going to get broken into. I would love to have drug dealers on the corner and just give me a car break-in every 6 months.
Right.
And me being scared to go out when the dark. That's my dream. I can't find one person that wants that. You know why? Because nobody wants
does.
that.
Yeah.
Nobody wants that. Everybody wants peace. It's just unfortunate what happens with generational poverty. It's harder to break out of generational poverty. It's harder when you're, and I've seen this in the kids that I used to teach with behavior issues. The majority of my kids came from downtown. The majority of my kids had some kind of mental health issue, which is a whole nother conversation. But if you track back their family had generations of poverty.
Right.
My girls will do well because they're in a better area, which gets them better schooling.
Yep.
They've been able to live in a house. And then when I sell my house, the equity that I have from that house will get passed down and give them a start.
Right.
You can't pass down equity when you're renting. You can't pass down equity when you're in a impoverished area and your house doesn't fluctuate like it should. Those same houses in Levittown that were $8,000 today are $300,000 to $400,000. So if your great grandfather bought that house for $8,000, and he kept that house and maybe gave it to his son, and then he kept that house and then gave it to his son, that third generation would easily at that time walk away with $150,000 worth of equity,
right?
Because of a subsidy from the FHA and the VA. At the same time, that black person that lived in that area that was able to buy a house.
Yep.
First of all, his $8,000 house wasn't worth $300,000. His $8,000 house was worth $79,000. Why? Because the area was run down. It was zoned commercial. Blah, all the things that we don't want next door.
Right.
It was zoned for. And so the equity that he would pass down would be way less than the equity that white families would pass down.
Right.
And so now what we're seeing is generational poverty, which really is it's I don't want to say it's impossible, but it's dang near difficult to get out of that.
So you've given in my opinion, first of all, you made this very easy. You have made this extremely easy. I am the yes man of the year over here. I feel like you're preaching, and I'm just amen and everything. So, so when we look at generational poverty, and we're talking about things like, essentially what you've described is just redlining. That we didn't call it that. We haven't actually officially said that, but that's exactly what it is.
And we can talk about the redlining and blockbusting, and these was what I gave was kind of an overall perspective of how things happen, and then there were actors that played the way that this worked. You come into the bank for a loan.
I know what I was going to say.
All right, drop it.
All you had to say was the bank for a loan.
All right,
let's talk about. And we're gonna do a hard.
I knew you was going there.
We're gonna do a hard cut right here.
Okay.
Subprime loans, the predatory lending practices of banks, even beyond, because you touched on it. You talked about FHA loans, VA loans, how black veterans knew not even to deal with the VA.
But black veterans could not get a loan. The ones that fought in a war
couldn't. And they knew that because they would have to go through a private mortgage insurance company. They already knew that it was going to be ridiculous, whatever that rate was going to be. And a lot of them, I did some research too. A lot of them were willing to pay more.
Absolutely. They actually were.
They were willing to pay more. And yet, here we are. So the bank said, all right, fine. We will loan you money with these ridiculously harmful, and we saw this in the 2008 bubble. That's where I was going with that. The way that black folks still haven't even rebounded.
Sure.
For real.
From that time.
From that, because of the predatory lending practices that were happening between 1968 and 2008.
There was so much black wealth lost when the mortgage crisis happened.
Right.
It was there was a step back that middle class black people had. Man, you keep opening these doors. Okay, so all right, so here we go.
We've got time.
This is why I'm not up for negotiation these days. All right, when you hear about social justice, the one reason social justice and the protests and all these things were happening was because you have black people not willing to negotiate. And here's what I mean. Black folks have negotiated for so long. If you were an actor in the 1920s and you wanted to be in a movie, the only roles that you were given were the roles of Sambo, the Kool-Aid lips and the bug eyes. And you had a choice. You can either take this role or leave it. So there was a negotiation. If you wanted to get a house and you wanted it in a decent neighborhood that was somewhat integrated, and you were black, you were going to pay way more money, and you could not miss a payment.
Right.
These days, in order for a house doesn't go into foreclosure. It goes into pre-foreclosure after you miss, 6, 7 months. I mean, it takes like 6, 7 months to go into pre-foreclosure. You have to miss almost a year of payments for your house to get foreclosed. Back then, a black person missed one payment, and they gladly signed up for that. Black people have negotiated for so long. They've taken so many hits they've put themselves in the position to even be ridiculed by others. Right. A lot of people don't like Sammy Davis Jr.
Yeah.
And Sammy Davis Jr. is a very complex character.
Yeah.
I don't think you can have one opinion or not on him. He was a very complex character. Sammy Davis Jr. for a lot of people, black people feel like he sold the race out.
Yeah.
But also a lot of people don't know that Sammy Davis Jr. was close to Richard Nixon.
Right.
And there were certain policies that Richard Nixon put into place because of Sammy Davis Jr. for black folks. Mm-hmm. He's a very, very complex character. But regardless of what you feel about him, he negotiated.
Right.
These days, there is no negotiation. Subprime loans was a negotiation. Mm-hmm. Anyway, redlining. You come from a really nice area in Yorktown. You sit down, you fill your application out. I look at it. I see where you come from. I see your neighbor. Okay, you from here? We'll check the credit and so on and so forth. Based on your area, when it comes to redlining, if you were outlined in an area, in a neighborhood that was considered green, you were more than likely to be given a mortgage.
Right.
Regardless of your financials, just from the very beginning. Oh, you come from here. Mm-hmm. You were thought about favorably.
Right.
And if you're on that borderline credit-wise, because you came from that area, you probably would get pushed through. Mm-hmm. Those that came from the black areas, the impoverished areas, the areas that they were pushed into and zoned into, if they came from these areas that were in the red, mm-hmm. outlined in red, they would not be given mortgages. Another thing that happened was blockbusting. Blockbusting is nefarious, man, and it's something that real estate agents did, and it's actually a technique that hurt black and white people.
Right.
There was a white neighborhood.
They preyed on them. They preyed on each other.
They preyed on each other.
Yeah.
There was a white neighborhood. Agents would hire folks from the ghetto to walk around the neighborhood pushing carts. They would go to a white homeowner and say, "Man, see all these black people walking up and down the street?" And they would hire them there. And again, because black neighborhoods had become slums, mm-hmm. because of the social engineering, white people thought that when black people moved to the neighborhood, it would become a slum.
Right.
All right? This is another mindset that was formed because of social engineering. They would scare the white people mm-hmm. out of selling their house, and they would have them short sell it.
Right.
All right, where a short sale is basically you're going to not make a profit. You're gonna buy it cheap.
Sell it cheap, yeah.
And they would buy it cheap, and then they would sell it to a black person
for a crazy amount of money.
Yeah. These are just two things that were done. Mm-hmm. The subprime loans. So the subprime loans were loans that had. It was another predatory thing that hurt all Americans, but of course largely black folks. Because black folks came from this history of poverty, mm-hmm. of generational poverty, this history of not really having that knowledge passed down when it comes to being financially savvy and using credit, because that's an education.
Yeah.
Being financially savvy and using credit is not something that it comes with a race or a nationality. It is something that is taught.
It comes with experience.
It's a skill set. It's like shooting basketball.
Right.
All right. So if your mama and your mama's mama and your mama's mama's mama ain't never owned a house and all they did was pay rent and it's time for you to buy a house, what knowledge are you walking with?
Right.
All you know is what you know.
Mm-hmm.
People walk in, a lot of first-time home buyers. We want to get a loan. Well, we're going to give you this 5-year ARM, right? Mm-hmm. Which basically is going to be an interest-only loan. Mm-hmm. You're going to pay interest for 5 years. Now, after those 5 years, this loan's going to adjust. And it's going to add principal to it. Mm-hmm. If your loan is $1,000 mm-hmm. and $300 of that mm-hmm. is interest, then you're going to be paying $300 for 5 years.
Right.
But remember, that loan's for that mortgage payment is actually $1,000.
Right.
After 5 years, you've been paying $300 a month. You get your statement, and now your mortgage is $1,000 a month. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, those who have had that knowledge passed down, mm-hmm. or were just in a position to learn, mm-hmm. investors, they learn how to use the ARM. They learn how to use this adjustable rate mortgage mm-hmm. to be like, I'm gonna get this house. I'm a rent it out. They learn how to flip the houses using that.
Right.
We used it as a means to just get in a house. It was a negotiation.
Yeah.
When the mortgage crisis happened, when all of these loans begin to adjust in their 5th year or their 3rd year, and people could not afford it. The main problem was the banks that gave these loans knew these people couldn't afford the loan when it adjusted.
Right.
That was the problem.
Right.
Not only did they know that they couldn't afford the loan, you actually had people packaging these loans into securities, and they would actually bet against the loan.
Yeah.
So that when the loans, so they actually needed people to default on their mortgage
for them to make that money.
In order for them to make that money.
Yeah.
So yeah, man, there's been so many dirty things that's happening, and I think the one thing that people don't understand or they kind of get misconstrued is that when it comes to racism and when it comes to prejudice, racism is no longer somebody calling you a nigger. Racism is no longer you being separated from another table. Right. Racism is no longer even a white lady walking on the other side of the street when you walk down the street. Right. Racism has been recoded. It's always been remixed. Right. You know what I'm saying? Like racism is the oldest form of hip hop in the world because it's always getting remixed. Right. It's always getting remixed. And so the way that it's been remixed today is if I understand because of history and I look at parts of your culture and I see where you are now, right? It's like if I look at you, Airik, and I know you just lost your job and you're 3 months behind on your rent. You had a great job, everything was going well, you lost your job, you're 3 months behind on your rent, you got car note, so-and-so note, and there's 2 things I can do. I can come and be a blessing to help you, or I can take advantage of your situation. Right. And that's what's happened to so many people. They've looked at their situation. Right. They look at the poverty. They look at the desperation. This is where you have the title loans, and it is a way to say, because I don't see many title loans in suburbs.
Right.
So it is a way to take advantage of people's desperation. So you don't have to be outwardly racist or prejudiced, but you can codify racial laws and rules and regulations based on a group of people, because you really understand the psychology of this people and what they have to come through and what they have to endure. And you know, they're going to take this product. Right. Because of where they come from and what they've had to, they're going to take this product. Right. We can't do it over here. It's funny. When I, last point. So I do some advertising and I get different calls from people that want houses. And it's funny, when I get a call from an area, let's just say the house is maybe like $100,000 and somebody's looking to buy a house for $100,000. They seem, and it's fine, they seem to need a lot more help and education than when I get a call from somebody looking at a $400,000 house. Right. You know what I'm saying? Right. They actually feel like they're a junior real estate agent. Well, I know a little bit about real estate myself, and I've so and so and so forth, and blah 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 blah. Simply because of knowledge that's been passed down, right. Simply because of practices that's been passed down. And if your mama and your dad weren't the ones, it was an uncle or it was a friend. When I went to my friend's house in the hood, they was hood like I was. You know what I'm saying? Right. But there were certain kids that grew up in poverty but still went to that friend's house, right. Where you can see a different way of living, right. Or you can hear different things, or you had a grandpa that worked at Sears for 40 years as a manager and blah blah blah. And so a lot of the racism and prejudice that you'll see today are going to be in the laws that really affect a group of people, right? A certain group of people, target a certain group of people, I should say.
So, I feel like you've done a great job of really kind of giving. To me, this was a fairly in-depth background. Okay. And I it's, how do I say this? It was in depth, yet you barely scratched the surface.
Barely.
Because there's 150 years worth of information.
No doubt.
That you just probably summarize in about 30 or 40 minutes.
Okay.
And, you know, whenever I have conversations with, you know, during the election season, we spoke before, you know, politics is more my bag.
Okay.
And so I would talk with coworkers and they would ask me questions and I would tell them, like, I don't even know where to start.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's too much.
And there's too much. Because I don't know where you are. Do we start with, and I'm, you know, for the sake of not ruffling political feathers right now, do we start with X in 2011 or Y in 2008 or Z in 2000, or do we go back to Reaganomics? Or, you know, so
Sure.
you really did. I hope people are inspired to just say, let me find an article. Let me do a little bit of research. You know, I mean, 15 years ago when I graduated from college, you know, you couldn't use Wikipedia as a resource.
Right.
But I hope people go on Wikipedia and at least look some of these things up. Look up the Fair Housing Act of 1968, and the Civil Rights Act of 1965. Or there are Supreme Court decisions, you know, that are summarized really, really succinctly between 1866 when we passed the 13th Amendment, or 1865 when we passed the 13th Amendment, all the way up till 1965. I just hope people are encouraged to do a little bit of research to understand, because we're not here to just make this a woe is me.
Not at all.
Situation.
Not at all.
Oh no, we're losing, or we've got these problems, and just hear us and give me. We don't want your emotional subsidies, right?
Yeah.
We do want to offer some solutions.
Yeah.
And you know, the things that a lot of the things that I think about, they seem to be so logical, so very simple, but yet people are very comfortable. Some people I've realized, even having conversations with some of my white friends, are actually wholly clueless. And it's not even, and that's not to blame them necessarily, but sometimes you really just don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And so, you know, having conversations with people, and I remember after one of the many shootings of a black man, having a conversation, like my friends, some people I work with and some people I go to church with, they were like, you know, let's be the bridge. Let's have a conversation. And I walked into this conversation and I was already angry. You know, I'm 35 or 6 years old at the time. Like, I'm over it. I don't want to talk about it. Fix this.
Yeah.
And I remember one guy actually turned to me and was like, I would love to fix this, but this is literally the first time I've even heard of these problems.
Yeah.
I mean, and he said it like very genuinely. It wasn't like he was trying to patronize me.
No.
Like, I realized in that moment, like, yo, some people really just don't know.
Many Americans that stand for America don't know American history,
and they have no idea. I mean, there was Tommy Tuberville, or whatever his name is. He used to be a football coach at Auburn, and he just won an election down in Alabama. Didn't know the three branches of government. But yet, immigrants can't even get their green card without that basic 5th grade civics.
No doubt.
So it's amazing to me. But I'm also slightly digressing. I'm starting to get myself. I'm feeling that sweat start to stir up right here. I'm getting a little hot. But I do want to talk about solutions, because I really don't want this just to be let's rail on everybody type of situation. Like, all right, so you've sort of kind of been educated. I don't know what camera I'm supposed to look at, whatever. You've sort of been educated. Figure out some ways to educate yourself if you haven't. He mentioned The Color of Law. I happen to have it right here. Yvonne, throw it to that camera right there. The Color of Law.
Textbook. American history textbook.
It will give you a lot of great information, just historical information.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk about solutions.
All right. Okay, so the reason that we talked about this, and I'm glad you said that, because all the black folks that I know don't want a handout.
No.
They
love hard work.
They want merit-based achievement. The reason I talked about this is because sometimes you have to deconstruct the problem. Sometimes you have to break apart the problem if you really want to fix it. Sometimes you have to take apart the radio just to see how it works,
right?
So that I can put it back together again, right? So we had to deconstruct this.
Right.
There's one other thing that we have to talk about, before we talk, well, it's actually part of the solution as well. And this is a real thing, and this is why I even say to some of my white friends, I say, before we talk about the issues in the hood, we have to talk about the issues that America has created.
Right.
And as a matter of fact, the issues in the hood, I'm gonna have that conversation with my folks.
With folks in the hood, yeah.
We're not gonna have that conversation.
That's our problem.
You know what I'm saying?
We'll handle that.
And really, it's America's problem, but it's been put in our hands, right? And what's happened because of these rules, because of location, and location really gets into education, because then schools were segregated and all that type stuff. What's happened is there is a subculture, not a culture, but there's a subculture that has come out of poverty when it comes to black folks. That you see it in gangs, you see it with the creation of the Bloods and the Crips. You know, back in New York, it was the Decepticons and the what's the Latin gang?
Latin Kings.
Latin Kings, the LKs, right? Yeah. So a lot of these gangs came out of this oppression, and I've always said one of the worst things that can happen to a people, and you actually see this. This is something. This is not just something that pertains to black people. It's actually like a social, psychological phenomenon when the oppressed begin to identify themselves by the actions of the oppressor. All right, it's a deep conversation.
Yeah.
To the point where the oppressor can now take their hands off. There are high rates of violence in areas of poverty. Those high rates of violence came from the practices that we just talked about. Now, some of that violence are now identifying traits for black maleness. When I taught kids, the kids that I taught were kids that got kicked out of school. Right. I taught alternative school. And kids would love crime, or love talking about crime at least. Yeah. Well, why? Well, when black folks were not allowed, really, generationally and culturally, the tools to become multi-millionaires and billionaires, and rap music was found, and rap was an innocent party music. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I could talk about rap all day long. It was an innocent party music.
We'll have a conversation
until Jerry Keller
NWA
took NWA, and NWA really was just talking about what was happening in the streets.
Yeah.
And when record companies realized, man, we can go a trillion different places. In the early 90s, if you look in the early 90s, 88, 89, 90, 91, there was multiple hip-hop voices. De La Soul, Intelligent Hoodlum, NWA, BDP, Big Daddy Kane. You had gangsters talking. You had intellects talking. Yeah. You had this
party music.
You had party music. Positive K. Yeah. You had De La Soul and Jungle Brothers and Tribe Called Quest, which really was like this almost alternative. Tribe is my favorite group, but you have this alternative rap. And what record labels did was they began to cut the multifaceted voices out of the black community and only showed the one voice that talked about gangs.
Gangster rap.
Gangster rap.
Yeah.
But gangster rap opened the door. You know, as a Christian, it's one of the things that I struggle with the most, where Cardi B has music and creates music that is harmful to the psychology of young black girls. At the same time, Cardi B could not attain the wealth or the access or the success without that music.
It's a catch-22.
It's a conundrum.
Yeah, it's a catch-22.
It's difficult. So anyway, I say all that because now when you go into ghettos and hoods, you now have those that have taken on the effects of the oppression has now become the identity.
Right.
And one of the ways that we can really help, and I mean, everybody says it. Education.
Yeah.
But let's be specific. financial education. You'd be surprised how many people that I talk to that have are people that have horrible credit scores, that have don't understand why collections, letting your bills and your credit cards go into collections, is one of the worst things you can do. Don't really understand equity. Don't even understand home ownership, and the value of home ownership.
Yeah.
You know, so we have to begin to go into neighborhoods and educate at community centers. Hold these classes. I was a director of a community center for 2 years, and that's one of the things that we would do. And look, please don't get dismayed, because you're going to have a lot of people that come out that don't see the value.
Right.
All right, you're gonna have a lot of people that come out that don't see the value. I also don't want to paint a broad stroke as if there are black people in high school who are not graduating with 4.0s and are they do have those aspirations to be investors and home buyers and so on and so forth. There's definitely those. All I'm saying is that we have way too many that aren't.
Right.
So I think education is number one.
Right.
I think that's an easy one.
It is.
And financial education. Education really could be for black, white, anybody.
That, and truth be told, that needs to be taught at a younger age.
Yes.
I remember getting ready to graduate from Hampton University, and I'm looking through that last little, my little course catalog or whatever, last semester, and the last class I had was econ.
Yeah.
And I've been avoiding it because your boy hates the maths. And so I can honestly say it was probably a blessing that they required me. Had nothing. I was a history major, poli-sci. Had nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
In the grand scheme of things.
Sure.
But they were like, no, this is a requirement for anyone in this particular college.
Come on.
In the liberal arts and whatnot, you have to take this class. And I remember I took it, and I remember talking to my mom about it, and she was like, just be thankful. They should have been teaching this stuff when you were in high school at the very least. You talked earlier about, generational poverty, and how things are learned. Everything I've learned has come from my parents.
It's generational.
I didn't learn anything in school. Even in econ, I did enough just to get that C so I can get that degree. Like legit. Like
it's all generational.
That was all. And so I remember thinking to myself, what does this have to do with me? I don't plan on getting in the stock markets. I don't care about supply and demand. I'm going to go to law school. I tried that. Was terrible at it. But I just didn't really see the value. And it wasn't until I lived on my own, and
that's usually when it hits.
And you have to start.
It hits different.
Yeah. and when you realize what for me in my case, what my parents were willing to take care of, that I didn't even know was a thing that I would have to take care of.
No doubt.
And then you start looking at your, the money coming in versus the money going out.
Yeah.
And realizing, man, I really should have been on this much earlier in life.
Sure.
And so, yeah, I do agree that education is definitely one of those things that we really need to push. Again, a lot of people, and this also goes back to your the whole hip hop analogy, in that there are a lot of people who only see rappers make it and athletes make it.
That's it.
We're from here. Or I know you've lived here for a while. I went to Bethel High School. Allen Iverson came out of Bethel High School.
No doubt.
And he came out. He went to the league my freshman or sophomore year, somewhere in that range. You know how many of my classmates, all of a sudden, thought they were about to make it to the league?
No doubt.
And I remember thinking, all right, that's cool. Now, I was fortunate, again, I had parents with post-grad degrees who've been instilling in me for as long as I can remember. You got two options when you graduate high school. You join the military or you go to college.
Yeah.
I didn't even know there were other options until the 11th grade when I started asking my friends where they were going to school. And they were like, I might go to Thomas Nelson, or I'm going to the apprentice school. And I was like, to do what?
Right.
And so, a lot of this does have to, again, it really is about this education and making sure that there's a better representation for our younger people in terms of what they can aspire to be. Because in order for them to really, you want them to see that there's more than wherever they're currently at. And it doesn't mean they have to go from living in abject poverty to LeBron James mansion in LA.
Yeah.
That just means they could live 10 blocks north.
And what's
in
fun,
a nicer house,
and,
just with a better education. Yeah.
and what's funny is without that financial understanding, and I mean, you're bringing up so many great points, but the second point that ties in directly with education is exposure. There's so many kids that my kids, when they used to figure out I did rap, they would go watch my rap videos, and I was a Christian rap artist, right? So
Yeah, we'll put that YouTube link in later.
I wasn't like Lil Wayne in it like that. First thing my kids were asking me, "You live in a mansion? You drive a Benz? Like, you bring my Tucson outside?" You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Because their only thought was abject poverty or mansion.
Yeah.
What you talked about was exposure.
Yeah.
I grew up in the hood, 14 years old. I had a bank account. I remember riding my bike to Bank of New York, and whenever I would get money, I remember I put in the bank. I would actually go to the teller. We went on ATM, right?
Right.
Oh, I would go to the teller. I had a little bank book where I had to keep track.
That's right.
Then I had a little paper route. So I would do my little paper route. My daughters right now have a spin card, and that spin card works like an ATM card. They can swipe, they can so on and so forth. You know, my daughter's 17 and 14, but they've had that now for about a year and a half, and they don't even realize. They don't even realize. Hey, Ma, we going to the store. You know, my daughter drives. We going to the store. All right. Hey, what's the password to Langley again? Checking their balance. They go. They're totaling. They're swiping. They're getting their receipts, or they're taking cash out. They're doing stuff with their friends. They're doing stuff with the church. You know what I'm saying? They're checking their balance. They're getting into this habit of budgeting.
Right.
But the reason exposure is so tied to education is because education is where we're kind of learning it conceptually.
Right.
Exposure is where we're actually doing it now.
Right.
So I think that's a second thing. A third thing, and this is a doozy. And I agree with the color law. Where he says that active harm requires active repair. If I walk up to you and I break your leg, Good Samaritan, Bible scriptures popped up. If I walk up and I break your leg, and then I said, "Hey man, good luck, take care of yourself, pull yourself up by your bootstraps," my leg is broke.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? You broke my leg. If you truly are sorry, if you truly are repentant, then come at least help me get to the hospital. The wonderful story about the Good Samaritan that Jesus talks about is that, first of all, he didn't use a Jewish person. Matter of fact, it were the priests and the scribes that walked by
Kept walking right by
in their religiosity.
Yep.
Pretty much like, he's unclean, I don't want to get my hands dirty, so on and so forth. It was the Samaritan
who the Jews did not like.
Who did not like.
Jewish people in
Jewish
history.
people did not like.
Yeah.
Who said, this man is hurt. Active harm causes active repair. Color of Law talks about if you, and you know what's funny, the word reparations, repair. I keep saying that because I want to get the repair in your head. Because I didn't like reparations. I didn't like that word for a long time. I was like, I want nobody giving me nothing. You know what I'm saying? I can take care of myself. I don't want no handouts. Reparations, now that I see it, now that I've educated myself on it, is in the same way that Germany gave the Jewish people reparations because of the harm that they did, the time that they lost, the jobs that they lost, the equity that they lost. Black people lost families. Culture,
language, everything.
A family would be put on a plantation, and the father and the mother would be separated.
Yep. Children sold.
So I like the idea where he talks about a program where through however means, I don't have all the technical stuff, but you identify those who were harmed, and you would give them a house. $300,000 house for $75,000.
Sign me up.
Now this sounds crazy.
Right.
This sounds crazy. The reason I initially brought up the idea that that in our impoverished areas, our culture has taken on some identity traits because of our oppression is that when you move that family into that nice neighborhood, it might be a little hood for a while.
Right.
And this is where you need America to have grace.
Right.
Now, America is not known for grace, but this is where you really need Christians to have grace. If we truly want to repair and we truly want to give back, if we truly want to say, man, we took away equality for such a long time, and there's really no way for you to catch. You're always going to be a step behind.
Right.
Because of the amount of damage that was done, generational damage that was done, you really are going to be a step behind. I don't think you can just catch black people up. I think it is what it is at this point. But I do think you can identify those that were harmed, and I think the home, I wouldn't necessarily give people money. You know what I'm saying? I would give it in forms of housing and education, free college scholarships. That's my fourth one, and but my third one is housing at rates, at prices, at market prices that are below market value, particularly to those that were harmed, that can be generationally can be tracked, and say, man, your family received harm because they were a middle-class family and they weren't allowed to live here, and their house that was $8,000 is now only worth $79,000. Had they be over there, it'd be $300,000.
Right.
Dang, we owe you $220,000. Let's go find you a $220,000 house.
Right.
I mean, it really can be calculated. It really can be. So those would be my four ways. Number one, we have to educate.
Yep.
Number two, exposure. I love that we take kids to museums and things like that, but we also have to allow them to experience and put them in these modes where they have to make these money decisions. Number three, reparations in the form of housing. And number four, reparations in the form of free education.
Yeah. That's actually, I'd piggyback off. I like those, and I would add one more.
Sure, okay.
And again, this is probably part of because I definitely agreed. I already had like the educational aspect, incentives to go to college was kind of one of my thoughts. But it all takes leadership to make that happen. Now, and we can. I think we can probably end off of this one.
Okay.
Hopefully, because we may open up another.
No rabbits. No rabbit holes.
We might open up another. So I've been very fortunate to. I'm 39. Very fortunate to have seen in the 20th century a semblance of progress.
Yeah, no doubt.
Through Obama, right?
Okay.
Through Obama's. Now, if you were to ask me if I thought
that's a whole nother conversation.
Right. If I thought he like truly progressed racial relationships, probably not. But I don't think he personally made them worse. Okay.
No, I totally agree.
But
totally agree.
Through that though, like that was again part of that exposure. I believe that I remember when he won, I said to myself like, "Yo, I can do anything."
Oh, yeah.
When Trump won, I actually said the same thing. I can do anything. Because I saw two polar opposites.
Okay,
You know what I'm saying?
I'm with you.
So now we're talking about leadership, right? Looking at Ben Carson, who is our current HUD Secretary, Housing and Urban Development. Now this is where I get into the politics of it all.
Yeah, I actually had a note about Ben Carson too, but go ahead.
Well, we can talk about it.
No, go ahead.
We got a little bit of time. We said that we were going to do this in like 45 minutes. We're probably knocking on an hour, whatever. I look at this current administration and I think to myself, the lack of leadership coming from that department because of the lack of experience coming from that department. When you have no idea what you're doing.
Yeah.
If I am so my day job is the tech director at a church.
Yeah.
I handle lights, projection, sound engineering, all that beautiful stuff.
Okay.
But you decide to run for governor of Virginia. You and I, we work together on a bunch of different projects. I'm out there on a campaign stump for you, and you decide to make me the head of the dot.
Yeah, because you're my homie.
Right. What do I know about? What do I know about construction down here at the HRBT or the Monitor Merrimack or up in Northern Virginia where it's I'm not gonna cuss, but you know it's terrible up there. It'll make you want to cuss. It'll make you want to cuss up there. That traffic. So So my hope is that we can get the proper leadership in place.
It's good.
From a government standpoint.
It's good.
I know that I've talked about this before. I talk about it with my friends all the time. Voting at a local level matters.
Yes.
That matters.
Yes.
Who's on your city council? Who's on your school board?
Mm-hmm.
Your district representation at the state level, or governors, things like that, because they are going to help craft that legislation that people need, and they will make sure that the proper funds are going in the right places as well.
Yes.
Right.
And they also rise up through the ranks.
Right.
They don't stay mayors and governors.
They don't.
Governors to senators and they
don't.
They rise.
Right. So we got two senators that are, one's about to be the president, one's about to be the vice president. Well, one was also a vice president, but you said what?
You talking about?
Biden and no. So
Okay.
they were both at some point senators.
Yeah.
And he became a vice president and now president. She's now vice president elect.
Yeah.
So, you brought up Nixon. One of the things that Nixon was not sweet.
No, he wasn't.
But one of the
Super
things,
not sweet.
One of the things he did though was appoint Romney, ironically, George Romney, Mitt Romney's father, as the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. And I have a quote, and I'm going to read it. He says, "Some white people and public officials will advocate the return to states' rights as a way to legalize segregation. As citizens of Michigan, he was the governor of Michigan at one point before he was made the HUD secretary. And as Americans, we must unhesitantly reject all of these divisive courses." And then he enacted statewide fair housing laws and told voters he wanted to end local zoning, where it facilitated segregation, and he evenly distributed affordable housing, like programs and such, around the metro areas in Michigan. Then he was appointed by Nixon, and he used all of the same thought processes and rejected so states and local governments that applied for grants, he rejected them all if there was a semblance of segregation. Yeah. I was shocked when I found that out, because I think of Republicans today versus what as some people call it, Republican classic, from the 60s and 70s, pre-Reaganomics. That'll be another conversation. I'd love to have you back.
Man, I want the one little caveat. Go ahead, finish your thought, because you're talking about Nixon.
But I just want to say, it really does stem from people having the right leadership in place and then getting it done. Because we can talk about, I think education is great. Well, who's going to enact it?
Who's going to enact it? Yeah.
The leadership. We can talk about housing, better housing voucher programs or whatever the case is. Who's going to enact that?
Yeah.
And it really does stem from the leadership, and we have to start at the bottom to make sure that our voices are heard, because people only show up for these presidential election years to vote, and they don't show up every other year for the smaller things. Yeah. So that's one of my solutions also. Gotcha, but your caveat though.
Now it has nothing to do with this conversation. It's just Richard Nixon was interesting. You can just cut this out, man, if you want to. It's just an interesting point. No. There was a time when Nixon was running. Billy Graham has always been a spiritual advisor to Republicans, and Nixon's another complex figure.
Sure,
he's another complex figure because he was a dirty dude.
Yes, he was.
But he had some things that he did that you were just like, huh?
You did that?
You did that?
Right.
At the time, the social justice movement was really burgeoning.
Yeah.
When Nixon was running for president, I think he was running or rerunning for president. Mm-hmm. And the Democrats, that was the time where the Democrats really began to take on the cause for social justice at that time. And one of the things that happened, and this kind of gets back to kind of codifying where racism becomes kind of hidden behind rules, regulations, and laws. One of the things that Billy Graham told Nixon was that social justice was a cause. The Democrats, I don't know if they believed in it, but they took it on.
Yeah.
I still don't know if they believe in it today.
Right.
But they took it on as a way to endear a group of people to their party.
Mm-hmm.
Billy Graham told Nixon, "You need a cause. You need something that's going to endear the opposing group of people to the party."
Mm-hmm.
And the one thing that Billy Graham recommended to Nixon was the cause of abortion.
Oh boy. Yeah.
It rings very true today.
Yeah.
Nevertheless,
all right.
Hard cut.
We'll take a breather. Yeah. So, yeah, we could definitely talk about that at a later date. So, we've talked about solutions.
Yeah.
We have talked some solutions.
Some solutions. Yeah.
We have talked about the history a little bit.
Yeah.
We scratched the surface.
It's a complex problem.
Right.
And you know, you're not going to undo history in a decade. To be very honest,
you're not. I mean, it's just like, they talk about a breakup. However long you've been together, add 9 months or whatever the maths is. And I'm not good with that stuff.
Right.
But it's pretty much the same thing. We have been free, and I'm using air quotes without using air quotes.
I'm with you.
Since 1865. So what is that? 155 years.
Mm-hmm.
But we are not free. We're not free. And so it's going to take nothing short of a miracle. It won't and I don't want to be cynical, but it's not happening in my lifetime. Yeah. It probably won't happen in our kids' lifetime.
Yeah.
I would love to see it happen. Like, I didn't think Obama was going to happen in my lifetime, to be totally honest. I've been proven wrong once. I might be proven wrong again.
You need to talk about that, too.
What's that?
Just what Obama meant.
Oh, yeah.
That whole thing is, especially you being a poli-sci major, here's why I think, this is why I think Hebrews 11 comes in. Hebrews 11 talks about faith is an action word. He did this by faith. By faith they did this. By faith they did. By faith they action.
Mm-hmm.
And then Hebrews 11 says this. And this is the type of faith this is what I call international faith. Mm-hmm. I had the pleasure to go to Africa about 4 or 5 times. And the first time I went to Africa, I didn't think I was saved. Because I didn't have that type of faith. Mm-hmm. I didn't have that type of belief. Mm-hmm. Hebrews 11 says, by faith, yet they still did not receive the promise, but looked at it as it were far off and greeted it. Right. What the Bible says.
Right.
They greeted it. So in my mind, because I'm a visual person, I see the people of God. I see the microphone, right, as a timeline, and they get to the microphone, and that's death. I see the promise on the other side of death. And they had so much faith. They said, hey, we're not going to see you in our lifetime. But I think that's the same faith that we have to have.
I agree.
I think that's the same faith that MLK had. I think that's the same faith that the Black Panthers had. I think that's the same faith that Malcolm X had, where they were catalysts. Right. And so that's why I take this call so seriously. You talk to people, and they be like, you wasn't there. You wasn't there when segregation. You wasn't there. Man, we've made a lot of progresses, but I'm standing on the shoulders of giants.
Right.
And they wish to see the day that we live in right now. And we still have more to go.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? They made steps. They negotiated. There were different things that they had to give up, limitations that they had to get to where we are today. And we're not saying that we haven't progressed. We're not saying that we don't live in a blessed nation. We're not saying that Black people haven't come far. What we're saying is we want it in full.
Right. And we're not trying to take what you have.
And we're not trying. We're trying. We want it in full.
Right.
And we want all of it.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? We don't want just a piece of the cake. We want all. We want all. You know what I'm saying? Because there's too many people behind us that suffered and died and negotiated for us to get to where we are today.
Right. Well, I think we'll end here. Sean, man, we got to definitely have you back, man. You are just a breath of fresh air, man. This dude, you're like a college level professor in terms of this education. Nah, man, like I thought I knew something.
I just like talking.
I like listening. I like listening. I hope our viewers do too. So,
No doubt.
again, thank you to Sean Slaughter. I don't know what House does here normally. I'm just gonna just say,
Yeah, hit me up on the socials.
yeah, something.
The Sean Slaughter on Instagram.
The Sean Slaughter.
The Sean Slaughter. And hit me on Facebook. Just type my name in, you'll find me.
All right. Well, this has been another episode of Tiny Talks Housing. Do some research. I'll actually provide some links at the end of this. I'm looking at this camera. So, yeah, man, really looking forward to hearing your feedback. Please watch, listen, and just find it in yourself to do some research, and not that dark web research. Just if you don't know, just ask a question. Like, I'm not here to argue with people. We're not here to argue with people.
Educate
We're
over
here to
argument.
Educate
Educate
and
over
that's
argument.
all. So, thank you for joining us, and we're out.